While you can imagine that the rest of the world will start saying that India will also increase its stockpile of weapons because it has a fast breeder program. But really, I mean, India's doctrine says we don't need very many nuclear weapons, but certainly we need a lot of electricity. So it is dual use, but currently it is largely from the energy point of view that this is a major breakthrough for India.
India has had a major breakthrough in its nuclear energy program. Last month in Tamil Nadu, the Prototype Fast Breeder Reactor attained criticality. Now, if you're daunted by how that sounds and if you don't know what it means, do not worry. I didn't either, but I'm talking about it because it is of great significance to our energy needs and energy policy, something that we are confronting head on as Israel and US wage their war on Iran. As you know, oil supplies from the region have been snapped just like that. And this war that they're waging is ostensibly because Iran has nuclear weapons. To understand all the different layers and angles to this development and the larger consequences, I am talking to a leading expert on the subject. She's distinguished fellow at the Center for Aerospace Power and Strategic Studies, Dr. Manpreet Sethi. Dr. Manpreet, thank you for making time to join us on this.
Thank you very much, Anuradha, for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
I'm stumbling over fast breeder reactor. What does it mean? Why is this so significant? It's a way of making nuclear energy, right?
That's right. In fact, what is so significant about the prototype fast breeder reactor that has just gone critical last month is that we are now entering the second stage of our nuclear program. So when Dr. Homi Bhabha, way back in 1958, you can imagine we are in 2026. So in 1958, he, along with another colleague of his, had said that India is deficient in uranium, which is the basic ingredient of making nuclear energy. But because we don't have enough reserves of uranium, he said we have enough of thorium. So, though we have to start with uranium in our first stage of the cycle, we will move up into the second and the third stage, which will start using thorium. So the first stage of the cycle we've been in since 1960s when we, had our first nuclear reactors functional. This is the first stage where you are using natural uranium along with heavy water to produce electricity. This is through what is known as the pressurized heavy water reactor, PHWR. We have 24 operational PHWRs at this moment, and the waste of the PHWR goes into becoming the fuel of the fast breeder reactor.
Right.
So in a way, India is also utilizing its waste, which is a major issue in many countries with nuclear energy. So that is the important thing about the prototype fast breeder reactor, that we are now moving up into the second stage. Many FBRs, when they are constructed, which will be some years away, we will be able to move into the third stage using our own thorium and reducing our dependency on uranium from outside.
I can hear several different things here. So, one is that this is a vision that was the bedrock of India's nuclear power program, and that goes back to 1958. So, it takes this long to realize some of these things. They are that complex and that capital intensive as well.
Yes, nuclear programs are extremely expensive. In the case of India, we also had a couple of setbacks. I mean, while we had started early in Asia, we were the first country to have an operational nuclear reactor. But then in 1974, you will remember, India had conducted its peaceful nuclear explosion. Now, because nuclear technology is a dual use technology,
Yes.
it can also be used to make weapons.
Yes.
And the world was worried about the fact that India's peaceful nuclear explosion also takes you towards nuclear weapons. And because of that, we were cut off from the international market. So sanctions were imposed on India. and the help that we were getting from particularly Canada, US at that moment was completely snapped. And India then had to, indigenously do a lot of things. So that slowed down our program. And the PHWR, which we were then, getting help from Canada, many of those design cycles had to be done by India itself. So from 1974 till 2008, when India became part of the international nuclear commerce after the completion of the
Nuclear.
Indo-US nuclear
Yeah.
deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then it became possible for us to again get uranium from outside. So the reasons why India's program has been so slow are because of this complicated international environment and how it looks at nuclear technology.
So it is so interesting. You use the word dual use, and in fact, I was going to start by asking you this prototype fast breeder reactor that has gone critical. Is it something that is only linked to the to nuclear energy generation, or is this something that comes in handy when it comes to our nuclear security and deterrence strategy, which was which came into being in '98?
Yes, so since we call it the fast breeder reactor, it is breeding fuel. And the
Yes.
fuel that it's breeding is plutonium,
Hmm.
which can also be used to make weapons.
Right.
So there could be a strategic angle to this, but for India, because nuclear energy is such an important part of how we are going to grow in the future, electricity requirements are huge. We
Yeah.
need low carbon sources. So therefore, for us, the plutonium that is going to be bred will go into more fast breeder reactors, taking us to thorium. So while you can imagine that the rest of the world will start saying that India will also increase its stockpile of weapons because it has a fast breeder program, but really, I mean, India's doctrine says we don't need very many nuclear weapons, but certainly we need a lot of electricity. So it is dual use, but currently it is largely from the energy point of view that this is a major breakthrough for India.
So the fact that the fast breeder reactor has now attained criticality, and this is a prototype like you underlined, what happens next? Does this mean that we can have many more fast breeder reactors? Does it mean that this one starts generating electricity now?
Yes, both of it. So the first thing that should happen is that this particular PFBR should prove its commercial operations. Since it's the first time this is happening in India, and really the first time for the world as well, because except for Russia, which has a fast breeder program, no other country in the world has it. So everybody is watching very carefully to see how this is going to perform. So at 10% of its capacity, it's a 500 megawatt reactor. At every stage, as it operates its capability, the Atomic Energy Regulatory Board has some very stringent regulations on the basis of which they are going to judge its performance and see that it goes safely. Because anything that happens here will mar our program majorly. So at 10%, 20%, 50%, they are going to keep monitoring. And once it reaches 100% and starts providing electricity to the grid, this reactor has become commercially operational.
Right.
So it's going to take time. From what I know from the Department of Atomic Energy, it could take even up to a year for this to happen. But this gives us the experience and the confidence then to start building our next set of fast breeder reactors. And the plan is to build several fast breeder reactors, which will then provide us with enough waste of that cycle
Right.
to take us to the thorium utilization.
Right. And why this thorium utilization is a key part of this program or of India's vision is because thorium is something that is available in India, and we don't, and uranium is not, or is very low. Explain this, this access to these really much sought after materials.
Yes, so uranium availability is limited within the country because of various public protests and other environmental issues. not much prospecting and mining within the country has been possible. So, and since the quality of uranium that India has is of much lower quality than what we can get from outside. In fact, people used to tell me that what the world discards as tailings is what we use in our nuclear power plants, because that's the only uranium that was available to us till we started accessing it from the international market. So therefore, in order to, in the long run, reduce our dependency on uranium, thorium utilization is important because thorium is available within the country. And that will then bring us energy sufficiency. See, energy security has become a very common word after what has happened in Iran. But our dependence, if it has to come down on uranium, then we have to move towards something which is available within the country. But thorium itself is a fertile element. It's not fissile. To make it fissile, you have to go through this cycle. But I must also mention some technologies are being worked out where you could move directly to thorium utilization without having to wait for the second stage to become operational. Because as I said, if FBRs are to be constructed and become operational, it's going to take at least a decade, if not more. So to bypass that, some new technologies are being experimented with, but nothing is available as of now.
You mentioned that this prototype fast breeder reactor would, when it attaches to the grid, and when it reaches that 100% stage, it will give us 500 megawatts of electricity.
Right.
So, can you give us a sense of what that 500 megawatts is capable of powering? Because I was reading that the Indian government wants to have 100 gigawatts of nuclear energy by 2047. So, this then plays a very important role in reaching those goals, isn't it?
That's right, because currently we are at about 8,780 megawatt, which means about 9 gigawatts of electricity is
Correct.
being produced through nuclear reactors. And as I mentioned, 24 are operational today. This will be the 25th once we have it connected to the grid. But it would add only 500 megawatts to the 8780 that we currently have. And if we have to go to 100 gigawatts, then we need a number of more nuclear reactors. The government has a plan in mind. So it has already provided approval for 10 700 megawatts. As I mentioned, when international help stopped, India at that time was having 220 megawatt reactors. Then we operated it through our indigenous capability to 540 megawatts. We have two 540 megawatts reactors that are operational, but we've gone beyond that today to 700 megawatt. So the plan of the government is that several of the 700 megawatt reactors will become operational. According to what was stated by the minister, every year one reactor should become operational. So construction in fleet mode is going on. Fleet mode meaning that several of the same type of design of reactors are being set up. And because this provides a certain amount of predictability to the nuclear industry, they are able to say that, okay, for at least, the next 10, 20 nuclear reactors, we can set our processes in place, produce the equipment, it will be taken by the government. So you have several of these 700 megawatt reactors that will come online in the next decade or so. Besides this, we are looking at import of nuclear reactors. Now, why import is important is because some of these reactors outside have a higher capacity factor. We chugged along with 220 megawatt reactors for such a long time. But countries like France, which are producing 75% of their electricity from nuclear, have as much as 1,300, 1,600 megawatt nuclear power plants. And that's what India is aiming to get from outside. Because indigenously, we've come up to 700. We
Right.
want to go even further.
What proportion of our energy needs are we looking to solve or satisfy with nuclear energy if we go on this 100 gigawatts goal? up to 2047?
So, because our electricity requirement is so huge, the base is very large. And we are hoping to get to maybe around 11% of our electricity from nuclear if we can get to 100 gigawatts.
Wow.
One could say that renewable energy is faster and it's coming up very quickly, and it is, already at about 50% of our electricity coming from, uh, is coming from renewable compared to 3% of our electricity currently coming from nuclear energy. But the point is that renewables have their limits. It is, firstly, it is intermittent. Solar and wind is not available all the time. So you need battery backup, which means again going to fossil fuels for those backup options. So if the government has committed itself to net zero global emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, then you can't get to net zero only with renewables. Countries like Germany, which phased out their nuclear energy program, saying
Yeah.
they're going to go to 100% renewables,
Yeah.
will never be able to get to net zero unless our battery storage technologies really take off in a big way, which hasn't yet happened.
You mentioned Germany, and you mentioned France, and you have two completely different approaches. So you have France that is generating so much of its energy from nuclear capabilities, and you have Germany that phased out and is going to decommission its last few plants, and this phasing out of nuclear energy and capacity started in 2011, from what I was reading.
Yes, after the accident at Fukushima.
A quarter of Germany's electricity needs were supplied from its nuclear capabilities. So, to take such a radical step, you have France with as one illustration, you have Germany as another illustration, and you have India on its path trying to trying to forge its own path. So, where is the how do you explain this complete diametrically opposite path taken by France and by Germany?
So that's where, individual choices of countries come in based on their circumstances. I remember when the Fukushima accident happened, and people started questioning whether India is on the safe path by continuing with nuclear energy, because Germany, as you said, 22% of its electricity at that time was coming from nuclear energy. India was only at 2% of its electricity from nuclear. So people said, if Germany at 22% is phasing out, why is India wanting to stick with nuclear? But our circumstances were so different. We are still a growing population. We are still in a growing economy, largely with manufacturing and service, which needs a lot of electricity. We don't have the luxury of being able to import things from outside. So we had to do everything on our own. Whereas Germany, and it's very interesting and very few people know this, it phased out its nuclear reactors, which were of newer vintage, and started importing electricity from Czechoslovakia's nuclear reactors, which were of older vintage. But they had that luxury of doing something like this. It was a stable population. It was a stable and a surplus electricity economy at that moment in time. So they felt that they could afford to phase this out. And the plan then was that by 2022, they will phase out all of their nuclear reactors and move to renewables. So while they were not able to move to renewables by 2022, the Russia-Ukraine war started at that time. So the source of their fuel, which was Russia, became unavailable to them. So that country was actually caught in a bind for a moment. They had to stick on to their nuclear reactors and not phase them out till they could find alternative means of getting that electricity. So some of the winters, as you have seen in Europe, have been terrible because they didn't have sources of electricity with them. Therefore, the mix of energy is so important. You also mentioned that France is on the other end of the spectrum. I studied the French nuclear experience for lessons for India, and one of the lessons was you can't put all your eggs in one basket either, because when the heat wave was faced by France with climate change that is becoming more and more common, at that time they were not able to, keep their nuclear reactors operational. They had to shut them down because of extreme heat waves, and then they again faced a shortage of electricity. So having a mix of sources is just so important, and I think that's what India is aiming for.
So, help us understand what India's vision is when it comes to nuclear energy vis-a-vis other forms, whether it's renewables or the old fossil fuel base.
Yeah, so we want to phase out our fossil fuel sources because they are the major emitters of greenhouse gases. Currently, we are at about 60% from fossil fuels, which means coal, largely coal, because oil and gas we have very limited for electricity production. So the idea is to bring that share down,
Hmm.
raise the share of both nuclear and renewables. And renewables, as I said, we are doing very well. We've jumped our production capacities very rapidly. But as I was mentioning, one is the problem of intermittency. The other is the problem of land. You need very large amounts of land to set up your solar or wind, and that's why you're going offshore now, so that you are not using land for electricity through wind energy. Then we have still not thought what we will do with the waste that comes from the solar cells. The mercury, how is that going to be disposed of? So while renewable is looking very attractive, it's cheap, it's quick to sort of bring into the grid, but there are some problems with renewables, and that's why we cannot let go of nuclear either. Nuclear is going to provide us with a very important component of base load electricity, which is what is providing you 24 by 7 electricity. And for grid stability, that is a very important dimension.
What are some of the risks that are being assessed when it comes to safety? I mean, we all know about Chernobyl, and you mentioned Fukushima. So what are some of those considerations in this debate and in this conversation at this point of time, given that last year India changed its policy? It has a new law which you mentioned, and then I looked it up, in your article. So you talk about the fact that the private sector is being invited by India to participate on this nuclear energy journey, and in this sector to reach that 100 gigawatt goal.
Yes, that's right. So the Shanti Act was passed last year in the monsoon session, largely to allow for private participation. Up till now, it is only a government invested industry. As you know, it's the Nuclear Power Corporation of India, which owns, operates, designs, constructs the nuclear reactors in India. But if you want to get the private participation in order to broaden the base and to have rapid induction of nuclear reactors, then the important thing is to sensitize the private players to what they are dealing with. This is a complex technology. Of course, there are other complex technologies that they are involved in, but this is one, it's dual use. And the other is that if anything goes wrong in this, it mars the nuclear industry, not just within the country, but outside. We saw the impact of Fukushima. 2011 to today, 15 years down the line, people are beginning to talk about a nuclear renaissance once again because many countries are showing interest in this, largely driven by the climate change concerns. So countries, for the first time, many of them are wanting to have nuclear reactors, but it's taken them that long to get over the safety accident that happened in Fukushima. But because the industry is extremely conscious of the safety concerns of the public, because public perception with nuclear energy is a very important component. You might have the best technology if the public is not on your side, and particularly in democracies,
Yeah.
it can really become a problem, as we've seen. So,
So that was the
pub-
case in Jaitapur, isn't it? I mean, the huge protests
Jaipur.
against where the location of that plant was supposed to be.
Yes, one was that public concern, but I think many of those concerns were addressed. Jetapur has been stuck largely because of price concerns. It's very expensive to get the French nuclear reactor
Yeah.
in India unless there is a fair bit of localization of the components and the equipment that can be provided from here. So unless it becomes, it feeds into the local supply chain. Getting that reactor completely imported from outside is turning out to be highly expensive, and that it's on the price that that plant has been stuck. But you're right. Initially, there was concern from the public because we started talking about it. In fact, Anuradha, that was another problem that India faced. One was 1974, I mentioned to you. Then we got over that hurdle by rehabilitating ourselves in the international, non-proliferation regime in 2008. And just as we were taking off on our program, the plans and the conversations with the French program, the American reactors, and the private industry, 2011 Fukushima happened. That became again a dampener for everything, and that led to a lot of safety audits of all of the nuclear reactors that we were running. One of the reasons why, again, the PFBR has taken so long is because it went into a safety loop once again to make sure that this first of a kind nuclear reactor should not run into any problem. So this, the safety aspect of our nuclear reactors is always uppermost when things are being done. That's why things have been slow, and that's why nuclear reactors are so expensive, because there is a cost of doing something and there is a cost of not doing something. And every nuclear industry has erred on the side of doing things in order to make sure that safety is well taken care of. But this has to be also transmitted to the public. They must realize that enough care is being taken so that no accident takes place. And in the history of our nuclear programs, which have been running across the world now for the last, how many, 80, 75 years, only 3 incidents of accident have taken place. Compared to every other major complex industry where more accidents have taken place. In the coal mining, so many accidents take place. And 50% of our electricity is coming from coal. So, I mean, one has to be aware of a certain number of things to have the confidence in going ahead with nuclear energy.
Even in the last 6 months, if I go through the newspapers, there will be so many instances of small industrial accidents, factory accidents, and mishaps, right? But when it comes to nuclear reactors and nuclear energy and nuclear plants, it's another, the scale is what is the reason for the safety concerns, isn't it?
Yeah, the fear factor is very high of this. So the moment you mention anything related to nuclear or radiation or a
Yeah.
leak of any kind, it just raises public concern, because obviously you can't see, touch, or feel it. So you just feel it might just get into your system and cause you harm. But when the government said they called it, I think, a nuclear energy mission to get to 100 gigawatts by 2047. My immediate reaction was, we need a nuclear education mission as well. So it's only then will the public be able to realize what is the role of nuclear energy in our total energy mix, and why nuclear energy is safe enough for us to go ahead. Of course, you have to not become complacent, stay with caution. All of that is very important. But the nuclear industry is well aware of this. Now, the concern is the private players who are
Yeah.
going to come
I
in.
was just going to ask you, what are the risks when private entities, private companies that are looking for profits come into this highly sensitive and, extrememly critically important sector?
Yeah, so the concern is that we've always seen private players putting profit as the biggest, motive of their effort. But in this case, they will have to be sensitized to the idea, firstly, of safeguards. Safeguards are some of the international commitments that we've taken on ourselves. So the nuclear program, except for the separation that we carried out for our strategic part of the program.
Yeah.
The rest of it is open to the International Atomic Energy Agency through verifications and safeguards. So when private players are coming into this, they must understand that there are some international benchmarks that we have committed ourselves to, and we have to live by them. So educating them on safeguards, on safety, on security. We do live in a very insecure region in terms of the concerns that we have of terrorism, of malified intent, organizations wanting to carry out any kind of a breach. So security is also a very important dimension that they have to be aware of. So it can't be just the normal guard who's sitting at the gate. It has to be like is currently that the CISF, the Central Industrial Security Force, looks after the security of our nuclear power plants. So these are some of the dimensions we'll have to put our focus on to make sure that nuclear energy contributes and private players are able to come in, and yet the level of safety security is
Do
maintained.
you think India and the Indian private sector is ready at this point to, get into this sector?
I can see a lot of enthusiasm in the sector for sure.
Hmm.
In several conferences, etc., that I've attended, the private industry is very keen. They do think that this is a sector that is waiting for the private players to come and quickly start producing electricity. I hope they're coming with their eyes open to the kinds of challenges that are going to be coming in. Nothing is impossible. It's just how it is done. Who takes the responsibility? I was asking this question of some of the people in Department of Atomic Energy. Who is taking this responsibility of outreach to them, on educating them on all of these issues? And I'm told that a lot of the retired, DAE people are engaging with the private industry, educating them on many of these issues so that they understand where they are going. I'm sure the private industry is capable of doing it, but it cannot be that, we will see when it happens. It should not happen. Nothing, no mishap should happen.
And this is we are talking about long timelines, right? Huge capital investment, long gestation period before anything gets activated and starts producing electricity. Or is it that the government of India and and all our work so far in the public sector is going to be the starting point for the private sector, or will they import reactors? I mean, just a quick sense of that.
Yeah, so currently, I think the fastest way the government is thinking is to have joint ventures with some of the PSUs. So,
Right.
NPCIL, for instance, with NTPC, has come together to form a joint venture called Ashwini, and the 700 megawatt reactor, which NPCIL is very confident about now, is the design that will be given to them for quick induction of those kinds of reactors. And similarly with the private players as well, if they tie up with NPCIL, it'll be faster, I think, than if they were to just go by themselves. But another stream that one should also talk about are what are known as small modular reactors. These are currently designs on paper. No small modular reactors are operational except for two floating nuclear power plants in Russia, but nearly 70 designs of small modular reactors. And the idea of a small modular reactor is exactly to beat what you are mentioning, the time and the cost.
I want to shift now to, India's nuclear security strategy. And in 1998, we had those, the nuclear tests, which made us a nuclear weapons country, a nuclear power. When you look at the nuclear non-proliferation treaty, and in our when we were setting up this conversation, you told me about how this review conference is ongoing. What are some of their concerns now, given the way Iran is being treated by the United States, where you have a nuclear weapons power or a country, and here you have a country that is trying to create, if we take it at face value, a civilian nuclear energy program. And it's not being allowed to. In fact, it's being attacked, and all its facilities and scientists have been destroyed.
Yeah, so there are many things here. One is, since
Seems
we've
so
started.
unfair. Like, to a lay person, I'm reading this and I'm like, huh? So it's good that India did not sign the NPT, did not become a party to this.
Yeah, so the NPT was, in fact, India was party to the negotiations of the NPT when
Hmm.
this was happening in the 1960s.
Hmm.
The treaty was finally concluded and came into force in 1970 with the sense that there will be two classes of states. One will be the nuclear weapon states, and the other will be the non nuclear weapon states. Nuclear weapon states being the ones who had tested a nuclear device before the 1st of January 1967. That's when the treaty was being negotiated and it was concluded. So anybody who had not tested before 1967 was expected to join as a non nuclear weapon state. That is something that India objected to, that we did not see ourselves as a nuclear weapon state. We had not tested by then, but we had our security concerns, and we didn't since the treaty didn't make it a nuclear disarmament as a critical component of it, which India was aiming for, because our concern was China had only already gone nuclear in 1964. So, and China was a concern for us. We had fought a war with them in 1962.
Yeah.
So, if China was going to remain nuclear, we
Mm.
could not have remained non nuclear forever. Unless, of course, the treaty could have taken these nuclear weapon states
Yeah.
towards disarmament. So, the bargain that the treaty came up with was that there would be countries that will remain non-nuclear, so non-proliferation, and the others will move towards disarmament as and when the conditions are right. They will define when those conditions are right, but everybody would have the right to peaceful nuclear energy.
Mm.
And that is the same right that was available also to Iran.
Mm.
Now, the problem with Iran was that it was one of the first countries to sign the NPT. Uh, it remained in compliance till the last time because uh, the IAEA was never able to say that Iran was not in compliance with its commitments under the NPT.
Mm.
Of course, when some questions were raised about facilities that were supposedly clandestinely moving towards nuclear weapons, those questions sometimes Iran was not able to answer to the satisfaction of the IAEA.
Mm.
But the US, under the influence of Israel and intelligence inputs that it got, always believed that Iran was going to move towards nuclear weapons. So they did try to arrive at a diplomatic agreement with them, what came to be known as the JCPOA.
Yeah.
Then President Trump decided in his first term to move out of the JCPOA. And I mean, we've landed up in this situation today where Iran was not able to convince the world that it was not having any nuclear weapons ambitions, and the world believed that it did. The world meaning US and Israel.
Yeah, I was just going to say, is it the world or is it the
Yeah.
US and Israel? And is it fair or is this question too simplistic to put, given the complexity of geopolitics, international relations, and the rest of it?
No, it's not a simplistic question. And really, I mean, diplomacy has to be the way out. Because even after what has happened now, you might have materially disbanded Iran of its nuclear, program for the time being. But unless it is politically rehabilitated or some political resolution to Iran's basic hostility to US and Israel is found, it could very well harbor those ambitions. So maybe, in times to come, it will go back to the nuclear weapons program. So you wouldn't have achieved anything much, even through the kind of destruction that has been caused to the country.
Again, as a layperson, it seems only fair that you all have nuclear weapons so that you can use it as deterrence, which is what India seems to have done so effectively. I mean, why should I not have the capability to protect myself in a way that nobody launches a preemptive strike, which is exactly what they've done to Iran?
Absolutely, Anuradha. That's the problem going around now. The challenge to the NPT, and the review conference is
Yeah,
in motion as we speak.
yeah.
It's going to be there for the next another 2-3 weeks. This is the concern that the currency of nuclear weapons is currently at its
Highest.
peak.
Yeah.
Yeah, because everybody feels that if you had the nuclear weapon, and the stark contrast between how North Korea is treated versus how Iran is treated. You look at North Korea also as a regime that should not have nuclear weapons, but once they acquired those nuclear weapons, President Trump did go and shake hands with Kim Jong Un. But Iran, which did not have nuclear weapons, got treated in a certain way. So the optics of it is certainly not looking good. And that is where the concern is that the NPT, it's the most universal treaty. Every country which has nuclear weapons is out, but everybody else is in. So anybody who goes towards nuclear weapons now will be coming out of the NPT. So this means the unraveling of the non-proliferation regime, which has been built for so many years.
Do you see this treaty collapsing in some fashion?
It's not a certainty. It won't happen very quickly, but certainly it's become a concern much more than it used to be earlier. We used to feel that the norm of non-proliferation is set. Nobody's going to break that. But today we started talking about the possibility of more countries going nuclear. South Korea and Japan have been speaking about it. In West Asia, Saudi Arabia, UAE, all of them have said that if Iran goes nuclear, we go nuclear. So the cascading effect that could happen is certainly a possibility that more and more people are concerned about today than they used to be even 3 years back.
So, when you look at everything that's happening now, does it make India stand and the decisions that India has taken over the decades with regard to the nuclear policy, both the civilian energy policy as well as its security, nuclear security strategy? Do you see that some kind of vision in hindsight? Does it look like we had a vision and an outlook that has stood us in good stead at this point of time?
Very much so. Very much so. When you look at what we have been through, the kind of criticism, the sanctions, the opprobrium that we got from the international community for taking a particular path. But this is what has stood us in good stead at this moment. When you see how the world is changing before our eyes, we're literally living through history in terms of how the global nuclear order is so different today. So our decision to stay with nuclear energy, to stay with the three-stage program, because again, when the negotiations on the Indo-US nuclear deal were going on, the West was putting pressure on us to abandon the fast breeder program and to just stick with this because imported reactors will become available to us. India had to fight to keep the fast breeder out of our safeguards program. The separation plan that was created kept the FBR out, and we fought for it. Taking it took us time to convince people that that is what we wanted to do. That's what we are going to do. And again, on nuclear weapons, in 1998, first in 1974, and then in 1998, we suffered the international sort of criticism of the action that we had taken. And again, we had to convince them to show them the kind of security environment that we are living in. China, with already having nuclear weapons, China having provided those nuclear weapons to Pakistan, Pakistan using terrorism because it had nuclear weapons and felt a sense of immunity. So for us, having nuclear weapons of our own became important in 1998. Also because the non-proliferation news was tightening. Not only was the world constantly telling us join the NPT as a non-nuclear weapon state, but another treaty called the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, CTBT,
Yeah.
had also come into the picture, which would have taken away the option of testing for the future. So we stood our ground on many, many times to be able to, today feel that satisfaction that we are doing fine on both fronts.
What a story. And I'm so glad that you made time to talk about this. There's so many different things here. I'm sure we'll keep talking because there will be more developments as we go along. And it'll be great to be able to check in with you about how, in what direction, especially this private sector participation, because that is
Yeah,
something that will play
yeah.
out pretty soon, I'm guessing. So it'll be good to understand what's happening there. Thank you so
Sure.
much for making time.
Thank you very much.
We'll keep talking.